Some things happen fast, like a vacuum finding your lost earring. A dog reacting to the word walk. And settling up with friends on the PayPal app. Send and receive money in seconds. Access your balance to send, shop, pay bills, and more. Download the PayPal app to get started. An account with PayPal is required to send and receive money. A PayPal balance account is required to hold and use a balance.
Here's one way to measure the mood in Brussels this week. The US-EU trade deal is moving forward because Europe has written in a good escape hatch. There have been months of arguments. But finally, lawmakers, capitals, and the European Commission landed a deal to implement the Turnberry Trade Agreement. Yep, that's the one Ursula von der Leyen and Donald Trump struck at a golf course in Scotland last summer. The basic bargain is still uncomfortable for a lot of people in Brussels. The EU lowers tariffs on many U.S. goods while hoping Washington sticks to its side of the deal. But Parliament pushed in some off-ramps, too, including ways for the EU to suspend parts of the deal if the U.S. changes course yet again. So transatlantic trade survives, but with a very large asterisk. And that was only one part of the week. Across Europe's eastern flank, drone incursions have been setting off alarms, literally. In recent days, NATO jets have been scrambled after drones entered the airspace of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And here's the crazy thing, those drones were Ukrainian. But Kyiv insists that these weren't deliberate incursions, and actually the result of Russian electronic warfare systems jamming Ukrainian drones and knocking them off course into neighboring NATO territory. Still, the political fallout has been real. Latvia has already seen a government crisis over how the incidents were handled, including the resignation of the prime minister. So the big question hanging over Brussels and over Europe is pretty existential. What does security look like when trade, fighter jets, drones, and Donald Trump are all part of the same conversation? That's where we're going today. Welcome to the Brussels Playbook Weekender. I'm your host, Sarah Wheaton. Politico is in Prague this weekend for the GLOBSEC Forum, one of Europe's biggest annual gatherings focused on security, defense, and foreign policy, with ministers, generals, and top officials all trying to figure out what Europe's next phase looks like. Throughout the weekend, we're hosting a series of interviews in a space we're calling the Politico Speakeasy. You can follow all of that coverage, including streams and our live blog at politico.eu. And now, from Prague, here's my colleague Janne McElvoy.
Thanks, Sarah. For this week's Brussels Playbook Weekender, I'll be sitting down with two Europeans with skin in the game, Janne Kuusela, Permanent Secretary at the Defence Ministry in Finland, and Brnabić, Speaker of the National Assembly in Serbia, and indeed a former Prime Minister. Both those countries playing roles in the war in Ukraine and a changing European Union. Thanks for joining us here at GLOBSEC. Janne Kuusela is Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Defence in Finland. Now, you're one of several defence and foreign ministers attending from the Nordic and from the Baltic states, so you're very much exposed on the NATO eastern flank. Finland has really stepped up. It's stepped up as one of the strongest practical supporters of Ukraine, giving over 4 billion euros, I think, in military and development aid and humanitarian support since 2022. If I were to read this year, and tell me, Anna, if you think this is right, I would say we went into it with a lot of people saying this is going to be a fateful spring in Ukraine, and then getting relatively good news and quite a lot of upbeat predictions that the war, with support from NATO and from allies like yourself, is now turning in Ukraine's favour. Do you welcome that, or is there a sense that it could possibly be a bit early to be making such sort of hopeful predictions?
We heard this many times over in the previous years, that the war may be winding down and we are seeing chances for peace, but then the war goes on, and it's the 5th year now, and we all understand how terrible and tough this is for the Ukrainians to do this, and we do best to support them. I think, the only thing I can say that the Ukrainian people and their defense forces just keep surprising us how incredibly tough and skillful they are. And it's our duty to come up with the support they need and also the pressure to Russia. And I think, maybe one newer feature which I picked up lately is that there's maybe a wider recognition that actually it's not only Ukraine depending on the West, but it's actually us in Europe more and more depending on Ukraine in the future. They have the strongest military by far in our continent, and the innovation and the production capacity that Ukraine has mustered under these really difficult circumstances really sets an example on us all, and we have so much to learn and gain from working with our Ukrainian colleagues.
If we look to the events of the last days, how concerned are you about increased drone activity potentially escalating into a confrontation between NATO and Russia, and possibly being engineered with that in mind? We've seen Ukrainian drones straying from Russia into the Baltic states in the last few days. Even last week, I think Finland stood down its defence forces after an alarm was sounded over suspected drone activities in airspace. And on one hand, we have an optimistic story that in drone technology, the iteration is so fast, the use of drones in the theatre of war is putting Ukraine, as you point out, not just in the position of a country that needs help, but a country that can contribute and has much to teach us. At the same time, populations will be saying, I'm kind of quite worried about this, that drones are being sent off track by Russia and either flying into or causing alarms to sound across the north of Europe. Just your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, like any country, Finland doesn't like the idea of having drones with explosives in payload heading to your direction. And we, of course, don't tolerate our airspace being violated. Having said that, we, of course, fully understand and recognize why this is taking place. Ukraine is trying to defend itself, and part of that is to hit in the depth of the enemy. And the Ukrainians have become more skillful in that, and the pace and the number of drones they can send to kind of faraway targets inside Russia has increased a lot, and that's kind of then part of the ramifications is that when Russia is activating its air defenses, occasionally drones to escape from their intended flight paths. But then again, we have the capacity to act when and if that happens, and we have a good surveillance capacity, so can put that in the right kind of context. And as you said, we are, as I guess everybody else, are really interested in the Ukrainian know-how and their technologies in both using drones and then counter drones.
How do you see then the broader picture? Let's widen out a bit just from the north and the Baltics to Europe, and particularly as a recent entrant into NATO. Now, we've seen the Supreme Allied Commander, General Brnabić, hailing the Ukrainian fight, extraordinary resilience and innovation in the fifth year of the war this week, and saying everything the Allies have paid for is flowing, despite reports of some delays. But do you agree with that? It was quite an upbeat statement, and I think there was a feeling that NATO needed to say something quite optimistic. But do you think that armaments and supplies are really getting to Ukraine fast enough at scale?
I think we are doing the best we can, and I know that, for example, Poland has a really critical role in all of this, and there are many countries who are supporting kind of delivering the packages in time, and there's very little room for lags in the sense that Ukraine needs on a daily basis more ammunition and all the equipment. But my sense is also on the lines that it gets through, and you can see it also, in the Ukrainian success to hold on the defensive line against a much larger enemy in numbers, and an enemy which has also been learning kind of new things as the war has advanced. So I'm sure there's always room for improvement, but I know that the professionals and the service people who are dealing with these deliveries are doing the very best they can. I think it's more often the case is, in a broader scale, is how rapidly the European governments are able to react and appropriate funding, and then things get rolling on.
But we have a bit of a mixed picture at the moment, don't we? Because you have that sort of relatively good news coming from Ukraine and that upbeat assessment there by the NATO general. At the same time, we're seeing if we go back the last weeks, we've seen the threat to move 5,000 troops out of Germany, and then the cancellation of a rotational deployment by the US to Poland, which prompted a lot of confusion among British civilian and military leadership. So that's an aspect of this picture at the moment. Do you think that this weakens NATO?
I think the President Trump has been kind of delivering on those lines which he spoke when he was campaigning and got elected, and he made it clear that he would like to see US having lesser boots on the ground in Europe and diminishing the presence, and we see some of that now. I don't think that's fatal for NATO's defense. I think the more important issue is that the United States remains committed to the alliance, and that is the case. I mean, we've heard it loud and clear that the United States is committed to NATO, but they expect Europeans to do more. And
can I just sort of really reality check on that? We've got two big, previously probably unthinkable moves to basically take forces out of Europe, and not just in Germany symbolically, but it's a major kind of command hub for lots of other operations and for lots of intelligence and also technological application of that presence. It's sometimes thought of it as just a sort of a bit cross with Germany. So yeah, but I think it's more than that. Can you really say that there is a commitment to NATO, given that that's what is happening? Yeah,
well, I mean, I've been participating in the NATO's defense ministerial meetings, all of them until now, and I think the message has been very clear what Secretary of War Hexet has been delivering for the European colleagues, and it is that US remains committed to NATO, but the US is also interested to have a lesser presence in NATO, and the US expects that Europeans will take more responsibility on the security of our own continent, and I think that's a fair deal. I mean, we should. I think it's about the time that we Europeans take more responsibility in our own security.
But we can't replace those numbers of troops right now, right? So I wonder whether your president, Alexander Stubb, has got a good, he's got a constructive relationship with the Trump administration and golf partner of Trump himself at times. Is there a role there to try perhaps to use that leverage? It sounds like you accept this idea that these troops are going to be pulled out or rotations aren't going to occur, and we can step up in Europe. But we know it takes a long time. I mean, Finland may be somewhat exceptional here in this. It's already had quite a lot of readiness because of the border with Russia. It's had a big whole society effort, and you've got national service. But that's not true of most of Europe. So it makes me wonder why you're relaxed, if I'm reading you correctly, about this withdrawal or this tendency just to pull back. In the end, it's manpower. It's noticeable.
Well, three things. First of all, not a surprise of what we've been hearing. And I mean, this is second term of President Trump, and we had these elements in the air in the first term as well. Secondly, I don't think the numbers is the issue. Europe's defense does not depend on 5,000 forces here or 10,000 there. You are right to say that Europe would need much more forces than we have, but we still do have forces in Europe, and we have them a lot in Finland. But what I focus more is the key capabilities, and Europe is very dependent on many key capabilities that we expect and hope that the US would deliver. And here's the thing, what we really need to focus on, and to acquire those capabilities in Europe. And that takes a lot from all of us. And the good thing is that we have now more investment, and we have the process in NATO's defense planning process where we have very targeted, meticulous system how to do it. But it will take some time.
This week, a story, I don't know if you've been across it, but a plan in the UK to impose a ban on imports of diesel and jet fuels from Russia. Basically, it was watered down, the sanctions that were around that, amid concerns over supplies and price rises off the back, obviously, of the closure of the Straits of Hormuz and the ongoing crisis in Iran. Now, this caused quite a stir and a pushback in Kyiv with the sanctions commissioner in Ukraine saying that he disagreed with the UK approach, which was like, can you give us just take a break from the sanctions on this form of oil and gas? And I think it was to do with a perceived shortage or danger of shortage of jet fuel. Do you think that sent the wrong message in terms of staying on course on sanctions towards Russia?
Well, I mean, each government makes its own calls based on reasoning, and I'm not in a position to comment any other government's actions. But if you ask me in general, I would speak for rather more sanctions than easing of the sanctions. So we need to really keep up the pressure on the sanctions.
But could you imagine Finland making a kind of move that the UK made, however temporary it's intended to be?
Well, I mean, we haven't had such a discussion in Finland.
But you would prefer that sanctions were more consistent, in other words?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that message might well be heard in London. Do you think we'll get to anything like ceasefire talks in the next year, Russia, Ukraine, or are we still so far away from that because of the conduct of the war, the deepening of the conflict?
First of all, I haven't heard that Russia has backed down a bit from the original demands of what they demand from Ukraine, and basically they want to make sure that Ukraine ceases to exist as a sovereign nation and a nation that can choose its own integration to the West. And as long as that holds, I see very little room for ceasefire. The United States has been working hard to negotiate and facilitate the ceasefire, and that hasn't materialized to a ceasefire. And I ask myself, if the United States can't do that, then who can? So, of course, I mean, we all do hope that the war would end rather sooner than later, and Ukrainians could start to recover from the long conflict and get back to normal life. That's clear. But I mean, it's really difficult to say when that moment comes, when the conditions are right.
Janne Kuusela, thank you very much. I think we ranged quite far and wide in a short conversation. So thank you very much for joining me on stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll be back in a few moments to hear my conversation with Ana Brnabić, the Speaker of the Serbian Parliament, indeed a former Prime Minister, about which way her country is turning with the war in Ukraine and zigzag relations with the EU.
When you finally find your thing, you want the whole world to know about that thing. So you use a thing called Canva to make it an even bigger and better thing. Whether you want to create flyers for that thing, make presentations for that thing, or design merch for that thing, you can do anything. So people can see your thing, feel your thing, love your thing. The next thing you know, it's a thing. Canva, the thing that makes anything a thing.
Here I have with me someone I'm very much looking forward to talking about at this critical time in Europe's story and in our defence and security journey. And that's Ana Brnabić, the Speaker of the National Assembly in Serbia and former Prime Minister indeed. Well, welcome to the Speakeasy here at the GLOBSEC Forum here in Prague and Politico.
Thank you.
Anna, we've met on the road a couple of times, but I think we met about...
It was a long time ago. I was Prime Minister and we met unbelievably in Hong Kong.
We met in Hong Kong, as we do on the international circuit. So you've had an extraordinary journey. You've been Prime Minister of your country. You're now a Speaker of Parliament. The European kaleidoscope has definitely been shaken, as has the global geopolitical one since we had that conversation, I want to say, about 6-7 years ago. How are you finding the mood? And I think of the mood here in Prague, where we meet, and in your native Belgrade. It's sort of jittery, particularly over these, the sense of the war with Ukraine and Russia is ongoing, the drone incursions in the Baltic states. The questions over America's posture in European security. I mean, just give us a sense of the mood as you're feeling it.
Well, I will start with how this impacts our European integration path, because for Serbia, much like for all other Western Balkans partners, EU integration is kind of number one strategic priority. And I think faced with all of these challenges, the EU is also changing, and the EU is changing their standpoint towards enlargement, and obviously this is becoming an increasingly hot topic. Also thinking more ambitiously about Ukraine, Moldova, also Iceland, and so in the Western Balkans, obviously including Serbia, we're looking at things from that perspective. That's kind of politically. Economically, obviously, we feel all of the economic challenges and grievances that everyone else does in Europe and across the world, unfortunately, because of other conflicts. And we try to actually use the buffers that we have accumulated over time to ease this burden on our citizens and our economy. Succeeding thus far, we have had the biggest GDP growth of all European countries in first quarter of 2026, which is 3%, which is not high, but it also tells you a little bit about the struggle of European economy in general.
Well, let me unpack some of that, because you went straight towards the EU accession as a priority question for your country. And the EU has stepped up efforts to integrate Western Balkan nations, including Serbia, since the Russia full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I mean, I think that's been seen, as you put it, as a part of this kind of balancing and an attempt to come to the best possible arrangement there. But Serbia is very confusing in some ways on this, isn't it? I mean, you have a country that wants to get into the EU, as you put it at the very top of your answers. Yes. Because Anna and I always have a bit of a fight, so she's smiling at me already. But you want to get into the EU, but at the same time, your President Vučić, maintains close relationships with Russia, which is engaged in a war of aggression against Ukraine. And he even turned up to Victory Day in Russia alongside Vladimir Putin last year. And isn't there a danger that this, the two stools, two chairs road for Serbia just weakens any prospect of you joining the EU?
Well, to be honest, it doesn't make things easier on us, which is more than obvious, since we did not open any new cluster in the EU integration process since December 2021. I was still Prime Minister at the time, and I remember well that at the time when I was in Brussels, we were technically ready to open two clusters, cluster 4, not to be too administrative, but just to explain, which is on energy and green agenda, and cluster 3, which is basically on economy and competitiveness. At that point in time, what we heard from Brussels was it might be too much to open two clusters at the same time, whereas now they're opening all of the clusters to Albania and Montenegro kind of in a day. So, at the time, that was 2021, it was too much to open two clusters to Serbia, although we were ready in one go.
The big difference is 2022.
Yeah, but in one go. And so you see, and we agreed that, okay, we're not going to do it in one go. We're going to open one cluster in December 2021. And then by mid of 2022, we're going to open another cluster, the cluster 3 on economy and competitiveness. Hasn't been opened to date, so basically almost five years. Although for 5 consecutive progress report, the European Commission was saying that Serbia is ready and gave recommendations to all of EU member states to open this cluster. Why wasn't it open? Because we haven't aligned fully with the EU foreign security policy.
Why not then? Why not? If the EU accession is so important to the future of your country, and as you point out, you've got you've got a lot of things on your side, and I know you're partly responsible in your former role in finance in Serbia. But do you think that in the end, if Serbia really wants to join the EU, then it cannot at the same time be keeping these tight ties to Moscow and suggesting a kind of fraternal relationship with the Putin administration?
Well, firstly, I wouldn't say these are really fraternal relationships. And I think that, the tight ties are kind of perception and the narrative that I think does not actually show that clear of a picture. We sure have the President Alexander Vučić has a communication with President Putin, but I would argue that some other EU leaders even have some communication with Putin or Putin's administration. But having said that, I would also like to say two things. Firstly, that Serbia has aligned 100% in values. What we have said clearly is that what has happened is a clear act of aggression. What has happened is also a clear breach of international law. We have voted alongside our EU partners in the UN General Assembly to condemn the act of aggression. We have voted to expel Russia Federation from Human Rights Council. So in terms of values, we have 100% aligned. The only thing we did not do is that we did not introduce sanctions to Russian Federation. And the whole narrative and the perception that is pushed there is that almost because obviously the whole world came to be very simplistic at the black and white, is that when I say this in Brussels, people get surprised and say, really, you have condemned the Russian aggression of Ukraine? And we said, yes. You are the ones who are saying that you are completely respecting territorial integrity of Ukraine? I said, yes.
But no sanctions.
At the same time, Ukraine is respecting territorial integrity of Serbia. Ukraine is one country that did not recognize the so-called Kosovo. So I would say that the perception is one thing, and in my view, the only reason why we haven't introduced sanctions to Russian Federation is that we were subjected to sanctions back in the 90s. Our people do not like sanctions, but if you look at the EU,
well, the whole point of sanctions is you're not supposed to like them. They're supposed to put a pressure point on you to change behavior.
The way that we are kind of almost being taught is that EU is primarily the European family of nations based on values. And in terms of values, we have aligned. In terms of sanctions, we don't have that big of an trade exchange with Russia. If you think about it, we have more trade exchange with Bosnia and Herzegovina than with Russia. So it's insignificant. It's completely insignificant.
So the EU Enlargement Commissioner, Marta Kos, has said Serbia could lose access to about 1.5 billion euros, a considerable amount of EU funds, if it fails to halt what she called democratic backsliding, and talked, of course, about some of the treatment of protesters in the protests in Serbia across the last year, and coming back this year in some forms. She says we're increasingly worried about what's happening in Serbia and assessing whether the country fulfills the conditions for payments under the EU's financial instruments. I mean, that does not sound as if your country is perceived to be on the route there towards the EU. And there are credible reports, Politico and others, of repressive measures against the opposition in Serbia.
If we look at the oppressive measures that one can see in the Netherlands or in France or in Germany towards protesters, even at the registered protests, and we had more than 13,000 unregistered protests, I wouldn't say again that we had kind of measures that would even meet what we see in some other EU member states. But that is beside the point, and it's up for a much larger discussion and much larger argument.
I mean, I'm not seeing a lot. The tear gassing of protesters. It's been intense, and you could see what in some ways
we haven't seen tear gas. Perhaps it was Netherlands or it was Slovenia. So you're
basically saying that some of this narrative you feel is not accurate.
But absolutely, we saw, for example, interestingly, tear gas and water cannons used against protesters in Albania, but no one said a word. And why is that? In my view, because Albania has aligned 100% with common foreign security policy. And then, you turn a blind eye to anything, whereas in case of Serbia, you basically, you do push to quite a large extent false narratives and also apply different kind of standards. But again, going back to Marta Kos's statement, it was related to a set of judicial laws that were changed, and we're now working on this. And on 12th of June, I'm going to attend the Venice Commission plenary session to discuss that, and I hope that soon enough we will have this cleared.
Let's widen out a bit and talk about relations between Kyiv and Belgrade. Obviously, complicated because of some of the factors on Serbia's stance. Now, President Zelensky was supposed to have visited Belgrade this week, which I think would have been his first visit since the start of the full-scale invasion. But there are reports that visit has been postponed and that instead Taras Kachka, the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, is expected to visit. Do you know why Zelensky isn't going to go to Belgrade?
No idea. I'm not sure that was an officially confirmed visit. I have really great relations with my counterpart, the president of the Ukrainian parliament, Verkhovna Rada, Mr. Stefanchuk, and we are constantly in touch. I hope that he will soon visit Serbia, because I was in November of last year in Kiev, a really good visit. But today it was a very good visit from the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Kachka, and just signed the MOU on cooperation on our joint EU integration efforts. And also open discussions on signing the free trade agreement between Ukraine and Serbia. And we hope that those negotiations will be able to conclude successfully by the end of the year. So quite a lot of exchange between Ukraine and Serbia.
Just before we close, something that I don't know how many people in this audience know this about you, but I do. You're the world's greatest Depeche Mode fan. And
yes.
Is this still the case? I know that's a bit of a hard term from what we were just talking about. One thing I was fascinated by is you were educated partly at a very high level in the UK as an economist, where you once told me that you just basically fell in love with Depeche Mode. So I thought we should let you just tell us why.
I love them. I don't know, since I was very young. But more recently, I went back to Cranberries.
Oh, you about the Cranberries?
Yes.
Oh.
So, but it's like, I feel kind of embarrassed because I feel like I'm 120 years old right now, but which is also okay.
Favorite Cranberries track? We might as well do
Linger, absolutely.
Linger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did we all like that one? Yeah.
Who's also 120 years old.
I think you were just winning the audience over on your Cranberries.
Okay, great. At least, if not Serbian politics, then at least my choice of songs. I get some benefit in the end of this interview.
You did.
I do get some break.
Harsh but fair, but we can agree on Depeche Mode. My producer Peter Snowden had 3 suggestions for you from Depeche Mode favourite song titles. It's No Good, Never Let Me Down Again, or Enjoy the Silence.
Right now, Enjoy the Silence.
Anna Brnabić, thank you very much indeed.
And that's it from us this week. Please make sure you subscribe to the Brussels Playbook podcast. That's now the home of The Weekender, alongside our daily show. And do get in touch with comments, ideas, or guests and topics you'd like us to tackle. You can reach us at podcast@politico.eu or via our WhatsApp. You'll find the link and number in the show notes. As always, thanks to the audio production team, Diana Sturis, our supervising producer, senior producer Peter Snowden, and producer Saga Ringmar. I'm Sarah Wheaton. See you next week.
Did you know if your windows are bare, indoor temperatures can go up 20 degrees? Turn the temperature down with Blinds.com and get up to 50% off custom window treatments like solar roller shades and more during the Memorial Day mega sale. Whether you want to DIY it or have a pro handle everything, we've got you. Free samples, real design experts, and zero pressure. Just help when you need it. Shop up to 50% off site-wide and huge savings on doorbusters right now during the Memorial Day mega sale at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.